Well, hey, folks, it's Mike from Profiling Evil, and today I'm talking to an expert on how to protect our children and keep them safe from predators. You don't want to miss this discussion. Hey, thanks for joining Profiling Evil in this special edition on tips for talking to your children about child abuse. May even be talking to other children. Now, if you're like most adults, you're uncomfortable about talking with children who might have questions about child abuse or who, unfortunately, might be victims of abuse themselves. So as we get started, I hope you're going to take a minute, hit that like and subscribe button, and ring the bell so that you're getting all of our videos as we release them. Now, I'm joined today by Rod Layton, the director of the Weber Morgan Children's Justice Center. That's a child advocacy center, the name they go by many places around the United States. Rod is a longtime friend and a retired criminal investigator. He's the director, and as a director, he's an employee of the Utah Attorney General's office. That was a place I served as chief of staff, and I have a great deal of admiration for anybody working in that office. So thanks for joining me today, Rod. Please take a minute and tell everybody about yourself, how you ended up dedicating your life to the protection of children, and what you're doing today.
Well, I'm a certified police officer. I started with the Weber County Sheriff's Office way long time ago, clear back in 1983. Worked in detectives soon afterwards, pretty much spent my life in detectives. And as I looked into the investigation side of things, there was lots of directions you could go. You could, burglaries, homicides, theft, fraud, just a lot of different things. And I don't know, I just didn't get a lot of fulfillment out of working those cases. But then I took a look at, crimes against children, and I just saw this incredible satisfaction from working these type of cases. So I went to my captain and said, hey, I'm interested. And he said, well, you're the only one, because they're difficult cases. So it was pretty easy for him to transition me over to work in other stuff directly to child sexual abuse or physical abuse. And so I started that in 89, 90, and I've been there ever since. I've left a couple of times to other assignments, but always felt the greatest satisfaction working crimes against children. So I've been doing that since about 90, pretty much my whole career. I switched over from the sheriff's office in 2004 and went to the Weber County Attorney's Office, where I head up a team of investigators and social workers, and we investigate all the cases within Weber and Morgan counties. That's what I'm still doing.
That's amazing to me, because I think back on our careers, and that's been about 35 years since you started doing child abuse cases. And of course, I had the chance to work in the county attorney's office, and then I actually retired the same year you did. And I don't know that I ever put two and two together. We both retired in 2004, yep. But we haven't stopped working, which I think is kind of
that's a problem. We got to figure that out.
That might be an indictment on how much police officers are paid. Maybe
it could be that, or you just, once you get in, you can't get out, and when you try to get out, then people are like, no, you can't, but
it does get in your blood, and my experience during all those years was that in cases of child abuse, that every situation is different, and every child is going to respond differently to the investigators, to the investigation, to everything that's going on. What are some of the things that our viewers could watch for as they go about their daily routines? The kinds of things that people should make a phone call to the Division of Family Services or to a police department about?
Well, here's where it gets a little complicated. There's a lot of misinformation about child sexual abuse, physical abuse, just crimes against children. And we all have been taught through all of our lives when we were in school and everything about this thing called stranger danger and good touch, bad touch, and some of those things. And so we're very vigilant when it comes to, watching other people and around our children. But about 90% of our cases that come through my center right now are family members that are the abusers or acquaintances of some kind. It's extremely rare for us to see a stranger case where, a child has just been grabbed off the street or something like that where they're not familiar with their abuser. So we kind of let down our guard. We see signs with our kids sometimes where their grades change, they get angry, their behaviors change dramatically, but we always look for an outside source for those problems when it could be within our own families. Pornography has created huge amounts of problems for us that way, in that it just drives this, deviant behavior within families. And so we don't expect that. And when it happens, we're shocked and we don't know what to do. And so that's actually the thing that I would suggest, is you just watch for behaviors in your kids to see if there's changes. And if there is, then there's got to be a reason for that. And it could be within your own home. The difficult part of that is it's almost impossible to protect children from everything that's going to happen. I mean, sometimes we just don't have the ability to protect them from everything. So it comes down just to reacting to that when it does occur.
It's so heartbreaking, and you feel so helpless at times in your efforts to try to help protect kids. I want to get a little specific as we talk about the issue. And I tried to be a good student of you over the years and over what the center teaches when you teach law enforcement and folks in the community. This idea that child abuse is anything where a child is hurt and it's not an accident. But what are some of those kinds of things? And then I want to go maybe into a little detail talking about like physical and emotional and sexual abuse. But when you kind of try to put it in a very generic term, what's child abuse?
So child abuse would be something that's considered a crime in the state of Utah under the age of 18. So anybody under the age of 18 is protected by certain state statute. Under the age of 14, at least in the state of Utah, a child can't consent to anything.
Now, is that pretty consistent across the country?
Yes. The laws vary from place to place a little bit, but so if you look at, and this is where you really have to almost have a flow chart when you're an investigator to look at the age of the child at the time that it happened. So if they're 13 or 14 and under, then they can't consent. If you actually had a 13-year-old, child that's out there actively engaged in prostitution or anything else like that, that's still a first-degree felony. They can't consent to any activity like that. So when you get under 14, they're considered a child. In our state, then between the ages of 14 and up to just under 18, then that would be considered a minor. So there's different categories of state statute that protect against different things. So you really, when you get your case, you sit down, you look at it, you're going to look at the age at the time of the offense, you're going to look at location, obviously, who has jurisdiction, then you're going to look at the act that actually occurred, and is it against the law? I mean, sometimes people will say, wow, my daughter or my son has been out with their boyfriend or girlfriend and they've been doing this, and we look at it and go, yeah, but that's not against the law. I mean, to a father, everything is against the law if it's their daughter. So sometimes. But
let's go back to like when you and I were kids. I mean, I'll tell you what, I don't know any of my friends growing up that didn't understand what a belt could really mean or what the woodshed meant. But is that a crime today?
It can be, and sometimes it's not. I mean, that's where we have to take a look at it. And in those cases, which would be physical abuse cases, we always use the standard, and I'm not sure it's the best, but if there's a mark, if they're leaving a mark on that child, then you're probably looking at least an abuse of a child in some way. It's going to be a physical abuse case. The challenge is to take a close look at that and not try to circumvent parental rights on how they, no matter what your personal beliefs are, there's some parents that still believe that's the way to manage their children. So it's critical that if we have an allegation of physical abuse, that those kids are brought into the CJC as quick as possible, so that our nurses, we have trained medical staff that can look at those marks, look at the injuries and go, yeah, this is caused by, either a belt or an instrument of some kind, or, maybe a burn mark. When we start seeing those, there's no question under the state law in Utah, at least, that's physical abuse of a child.
Yeah, I remember in some of the instruction I've read online at your website, and folks, make sure you're going to the CJC website. We're going to put that in the link down below. But pretty direct. I mean, hitting, constant yelling, unwanted touching, all those things can be child abuse. And the bottom line is, if someone's hurting a child or making them feel uncomfortable, and that uncomfortable is pretty subjective, I think, they got to be able to say enough's enough. And that's a really hard thing for a child.
It is. That's, I just met with somebody this morning, and the abuse occurred from the time they were 8 years old till the time they were 14 years old with a neighbor. And so everybody's going to take a look at that and go, well, wait a minute, you're 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, you go through these years, and how many people did you tell? None. Did that person continue to go over to the neighbors where the abuse was occurring? They did. And so for us that have not been through that situation, it's very difficult for us to look at it and go, well, what the heck? Why wasn't this, this person just protecting themselves? And one thing I've learned over all these years is I never, ever try to say to a victim of sexual abuse, I understand what you're going through. I absolutely do not. And I will never say that, and I will never try to. And there was lots of things from the perpetrator with this victim that produced guilt on their part, on the child's part. I'm going to tell everybody, they're going to know what happened to you. So they're very manipulative people. They're very good at that grooming technique and behavior. And then those that haven't been through that are very critical of, you should have just fixed this. That's just not realistic, and I would never attempt to say I understand what you went through.
Yeah, so and abuse can be, I guess, broken down into different buckets, and I'd like to explore those a little bit with you, and maybe start with what to me seems like it would probably be one of the most common forms of abuse, and that's physical abuse. How would you describe physical abuse from a criminal standpoint, and as someone who's spent 3.5 decades looking at these kinds of crimes?
Again, the physical abuse cases are where, again, very difficult to work those because of, that line, is the line being crossed. So physical abuse cases is any time that you cause an injury to a child, basically. And there's
shaking, hitting, choking, burning.
If there's physical evidence of that, if we can see that. Now, luckily for us in the state of Utah, we have access to an amazing hospital with Primary Children's Hospital. So if we have an incident of, say, an allegation of choking, or some of those that are more difficult to see a physical evidence of that, there may not be any marks. So we can have those kids examined by nurse practitioners, and then the nurse practitioners will consult with the medical team at the Primary Children's Hospital, and they can do additional testing. We do a lot of soft tissue examinations. We do x-rays. We do a lot of stuff to look for broken bones or past breaks. So when you start getting into the medical side of things on physical abuse, then that's where you really got to have a team of experts that know exactly what they're doing, because those injuries sometimes are difficult to see. So we just have to get them into the CJC, take a look at what we've got there, and then see if we need to step it up to the next level and do something more.
You know, it makes me think, I mean, I have grandkids that play football, some play soccer, some are in tumbling and are doing, you know, that kind of stuff. When I see bumps and bruises on their legs or their forearms or something, I'm like, yeah, hopefully they're digging in and they're, you know, playing sports hard.
Yeah.
But if all of a sudden you're seeing you know, like a hand mark on an arm or a big bruise on a child's back or something at the swimming pool, I mean, at what point do you say, man, maybe I ought to make a call?
Exactly, and that's a great point. So we do look for those things. There's certain things that children just injure, and you named a couple of them. Their elbows, their arms, the front of their legs where you got that bony structure. They hit things, they run into things. Their chins, their faces sometimes will have bruising because they're falling down. But then if you find something like an unusual burn or bruising behind the ear is a really interesting one, because how often does that happen unless you got a parent or an adult of some kind grabbing their ears and twisting them or pulling on them? So, you know, that's why you got to have trained medical staff to look at physical abuse cases. They're very they're subjective in ways, and like what's the parent saying? So this is where a good sex crimes detective will come into play. A special victims detective is during that interview, and if they're admitting to, yeah, I lost my temper and I kicked my son in the behind, or I grabbed him and pulled him across the room, then maybe that, you know, that's legitimate. But if the marks don't match of what they're telling us, then it becomes it may become a criminal case, and then it comes down to cooperation. It comes down to a detective asking the right questions and being trained on what to ask.
You know, another really, I would think, big area, maybe bigger than physical abuse in reality, now that I'm kind of rethinking this as we're going along, is emotional abuse. But how does emotional abuse cross the threshold to being criminal?
Okay, so this is another difficult area. So the state of Utah does not necessarily have any state statutes making emotional abuse a criminal offense. So emotional abuse. So you got two investigators at the same time working on this case. You'll have DCFS, Division of Child and Family Services. They have a special division within DCFS called CPS, Child Protective Services. They're trained investigators to look at going into a home and seeing what that emotional abuse looks like. It usually does not rise to the level of a criminal offense, and so law enforcement at that point will back out of it, and Child Protective Services will take it over. And then they're going to go into a different direction, such as, you know, parenting skills, you know, offering services with therapy, different things like that. In my opinion, emotional abuse is probably worse than physical abuse in lots of ways. It can be devastating to a child, but there's just nothing in the state law, criminal statutes that direct us as far as when does that become criminal. The words you say would be so difficult to prove. And again, it's one parent may be perfectly fine with using certain terms and another parent would never do that. So it's a fine line. And so we don't do physical abuse cases at the Children's Justice Center.
Yeah, and you listen to maybe people that are high-profile personalities that talk about abuse when they were younger, those that have experienced it, And they always talk about the emotional being more difficult to get over than the bruise that will eventually heal. I think probably the toughest one, and I want to just mention it and we'll kind of move on, but that's sexual abuse, and that improper touching of a child. I mean, what would be the easiest way to kind of encapsulate what is sexual abuse, and how you can tell as a parent or a grandpa or a grandma or a neighbor that a child might be in a position where they're being sexually abused?
Again, sexual abuse is our main area of investigations. So 80% of the cases that come to the Children's Justice Center are sexual abuse cases. So those are they're difficult to work. Again, a lot of detectives are hesitant sometimes to get into this area because they don't want to deal with the sexual abuse cases. It all comes down to really what a child says. And so if you haven't got a CJC in place, you haven't got trained forensic interviewers that set the foundation for that sexual abuse and what happened, then you're going to have some problems. And so over the years, we've become much better at identifying those things and getting them in for an interview and then having the child disclose. One thing that's a myth out there is, you bring your child into a CJC or a Children's Advocacy Center in other states, wherever you may be, they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to talk to an investigator because that investigator's a stranger. That's false. That's very, very false. We have not experienced that. If the child knows that they're in that type of a setting and they're in that room with a trained forensic interviewer, they will disclose all day long. They will talk. They will tell you what happened. They're anxious to. It's a healing process for them. We're careful not to do a second or third interview. If we have to do that, it's got to be approved by a couple of different people, including the county attorney's office, to do a second interview. So we try to get all the information in the first interview, and once that child discloses sexual abuse, and Mike, you identified a couple. It could be touching over the clothes, it could be touching under the clothes, it could be some type of a penetration type situation, and so we will identify all those, and then it goes back again to a good detective that's passionate about their job. That's what we look for in these type of detectives, that they will now corroborate what the child says. You can't bring a criminal first-degree felony against someone if you have just the disclosure. It has to be corroborated through physical types of evidence or other sources. So the work starts after the interview is done for the detectives.
The other area of abuse that I kind of didn't even think about until just now, but again, it's one, we're seeing it in the news right now, is not only physical abuse in that particular case in the news, but neglect. And this idea that a child's being neglected when they're not given food or care or a nice place to live. But neglect can go beyond that, can't it?
Yeah, that's the other category we haven't mentioned here, and that's environmental neglect. So environmental neglect, again, is another situation where those could go either way. They could go criminal and they could go through DCFS, and both would have a part in some of those type of cases. If you have a child restrained or you have a child, then obviously that's a criminal case, and that could be anywhere from kidnapping to an unlawful detention or something else. If you go into a home and it's just a dirty house, you have food in the refrigerator that's spoiled, you have dishes that haven't been done for weeks, you have just a dirty house, that would fall under the jurisdiction of DCFS. That would not be necessarily law enforcement that would come in and charge them with having a dirty house. And so those are really horrific cases in ways because it's just so unhealthy. But unless there was some other indicator that the child had been physically restrained or then you would turn that to DCFS. But you could have a criminal case as well.
I think there's this natural tendency for all of us to create monsters in our mind of who this abuser is. You talked about it earlier, the trench coat in the alley, but the reality is, I don't know, can you profile who an abuser is or going to be?
You cannot. I wish we could. Our job would be much easier. I tell when I hire somebody brand new, they come to the CJC as a receptionist or whatever, I will sit down with them and I will, before they start the first day on the job, I will tell them, look, you're going to see people that you thought were the most trustworthy people in the world. You're going to see people in power. You're going to see people within clergy. You're going to see people in the public school systems. You're just going to see, business owners. You're going to see a lot, and they're all going to be individuals that have abused a child. If it's going to, I guess, just undermine your ability to cope with society, I don't know how to exactly put that into words, but if you're going to create this giant mistrust with everybody and you can't handle that on your side, then this is not the job for you, because you're going to see people walk through the door and you're going to say, that's impossible. He's such a good guy. But if you really think about it, good guys are, that's one of the characteristics of a perpetrator, because they're very good at manipulating, they're trusted, they're
chameleons.
Yes. And so I'm like, I'd love to have you work here, but I don't want you to ruin your life, that there's just no good people in the world, because that's just not true. Well, maybe in my world there isn't. I've seen so many, but I understand that they have choices, and they're going to, if they do that and they groom a child and that's their, that's their motive, then I'm not sure I can stop that. And and again, pornography has enhanced that greatly, so that's created this whole different, problem for us. And,
I talk about that a lot on Profiling Evil. I talk about the fact that for people that are religious in nature, you think about the Bible, everything was created spiritually before it was created physically. And the same thing I've always maintained happens in crime. But the spiritual part is just the fantasy and the decision making that occurs up here in the brain when people say, and pornography is a good example. I continue to look at this pornography that, there's deviant behavior and criminal behavior, but that deviant behavior that may say, I'm going to look at child pornography, pretty soon the fantasy is not good enough and they have to act it out.
Yeah, and you made a great point there, that if you really look at our world today, in many cases, we are very accepting of lots of things that we weren't accepting of years ago. And so as you get online and you start looking at, I call it vanilla pornography, that, there's not a lot of deviant behavior with it, but as they view that over and over, it becomes a little boring to them. And so they'll start looking for material that's not quite acceptable by society. We haven't got that far yet to where, this is acceptable. Are we headed that direction? Yeah, we certainly are headed that direction. But the more deviant that it becomes, the more, I guess, enticing to some of these people that are looking for that. It's that high that they get from, looking at things that society has not quite accepted yet.
Yeah, and it's not against the law to be deviant, but you're brushing up on the edge so closely that it just seems like you're going to lose it. I remember many years ago how angry I was as a young investigator when one of the victims in a child sexual abuse case that I was handling, as I interviewed them, they were making comments about the abuse somehow being their fault, and that they were apologetic, this is my fault that this happened. What are your thoughts about those kinds of statements, and how do you respond to these little kids who utter words like that?
It takes time to fix that the best that you can, and so that again, that's part of what a good groomer will do. A person, I say good, I'm using that in I guess a relative type term here, but
Successful groomer.
a successful, maybe a better word. They will use that, and they will say things like, this happened to you because you were willing to let it happen. And if you tell your mom or your dad, then they're not going to understand. They're going to know that this was your choice. It was both of our choices. And so when you start putting that into the head of an 8-year-old, then just like that one I talked with this morning, I mean, she was totally convinced that, yeah, I could have probably stopped this, but I didn't. And so now I'm responsible. And so it's, once you put that, I mean, I think sometimes we expect a child to think like an adult. We're like, yeah, you're only 12, but we expect you to act like, a 30-year-old and understand the world, and they don't. Plus, sometimes the grooming includes things like a new phone and, presents, gifts, things like that. And you get a child that, boy, doesn't get a lot of those things. And sometimes it's,
That's exactly what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. When you look at that case, he's grooming those kids. He and Ghislaine Maxwell and giving them things that a kid that was, and I'm not judging anyway, but a kid that was living in a trailer park was overwhelmed by.
I had a case years ago, and it was a little girl. She was 7 or 8 years old, and she loved to go to McDonald's, and her family just didn't do that. There was some poverty issues there, and so this grown man, 55 years old, he saw an opportunity there. So he would say, "Hey, let's go in my truck, and I'll take you to McDonald's." So he would drive to a secluded location. He would, molest her in multiple ways, and then as soon as that was over, she was all excited because now she's going to McDonald's. And he would stop by, he would buy her the treats. And when I interviewed her, she said, "Well, the reason I never told is because then I don't go to McDonald's anymore." And so you're still talking a child. She was 7 or 8 years old, and eventually she had just had enough of it, and she got to be a little older. I think she was about 10 or 11 when I finally interviewed her. So 2 or 3 years of that going on. Also bought her clothes, bought her things that she wasn't going to get, and there's a lot of pressure. I get new clothes to go to school. If I go to school with new clothes, then I'm more accepted by the kids at school. So I can tolerate the sexual abuse. If because of that. So, I always tell people, again, don't try to put yourself in that position because you simply can't do it. That's not your life, and you can't just embed yourself in that. And that's the hard part, but.
Hey everybody, it's Mike from Profiling Evil. I've been studying criminal behavior for more than 40 years, and one of my favorite research tools is Truthfinder. It's online, and you're not going to believe the information stored there. So if you want to know more about that new neighbor, your babysitter, or your next online date, give Truthfinder a try. I'm including a link below with special discount pricing. You got to click the link to get it, and then enter EVIL10 at checkout. We're an affiliate, which means we get a small commission, enough to buy a small Diet Dr. Pepper, but you can cancel at any time. Thanks for listening today. So then, how does a child prevent abuse from happening to them? I mean, what are a couple of key tips that maybe we could instill in children that we have influence with?
Empower them. There's only one solution that I really see to it, and that's empower the child to say no to an adult. If you look at our culture and you look at the way that we raise our kids, a lot of times we are, you must do what an adult tells you to do. And I always use the example of, Uncle Joe shows up at the house for a visit, and what does the parent say? "You go hug Uncle Joe." Well, she doesn't want to he or she doesn't want to hug Uncle Joe for some reason, but what do we say? No, you go over there and you hug Uncle Joe. And so we take away their ability to make that decision. If they say, I don't want to hug Uncle Joe, then you say, oh, sorry, Uncle Joe, she doesn't want to hug you today, or whatever. If you even need to apologize, or just say to the child, that's okay. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. But we don't do that. If you watch, it's like, and if an adult tells you to do something, then you do it. And there is some times we do have to teach that principle. I'm not saying you just eliminate that. If your school teacher asks you to do homework, you do your homework. Yeah. But a child does know. A child can feel, that inside of them that there's something wrong here. This is not. The line's been crossed, and I don't feel comfortable. I love the story of the little girl we had out in one of our cities not too long ago. She was 11 years old, 12 years old, and she actually walked into a 7-Eleven. She was getting a treat. As she looked around, she looked at a man in the 7-Eleven. Immediately she got this feeling, that man is not safe for me. Never met him, nothing. She's one of my heroes. She immediately started to take action, like, I don't know what it is, but I don't feel comfortable with this person. She left the store. She gets on her bike. She's still got her radar up. She's like, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I don't like this, and she trusted the feelings. So she actually made a plan. And she said, I'm going to ride home on my bike. As I'm riding home, if anything's happened, I'm going to hold on to my bike as tight as I can. And within minutes, this same man was hiding behind a house, come running out from the house, grabbed her, and tried to wrestle her off of the bike. And she held on so tight, he couldn't get the bike out of her hands. They fought for a little bit, and then finally it started to create too much noise, and so he took off. And she ran home, told her dad. Her dad went looking, made the report. Within 4 or 5 hours, law enforcement had made the arrest.
Really? Oh, how cool.
But she felt it at the very beginning, and even small children can feel that, up to obviously teenagers, where if that feeling comes across, it's real, and you need to pay attention to it. But we sometimes disregard it and just go, it's just me being paranoid or something, so.
Yeah. So some people would say that's a guardian angel whispering to them. Others would say, it's the light of goodness pushing them in a direction. Others would just say it's street sense. Yeah. But yeah, we need to really trust that. So take a minute and tell us what happens inside the doors of your Children's Justice Center. I mean, what do the professionals do? Let's just kind of walk a child through your front door and out your back door.
All right. So we're everything that comes through our doors is a referral. We don't have people come in off the street. It has to be referred to us. So usually it's either law enforcement or Child Protective Services will refer the child. So the allegation comes into one of them, it's reported, they will call us and say, okay, I have a child coming in tomorrow morning. They give us the age, the name, a few things like that. So then we get our forensic interviewers ready. We get our child advocates ready. As soon as they walk through the door, then we take over. The law enforcement or Child Protective Services, they go back to another room where they monitor everything. We don't have law enforcement interview anymore. We don't have Child Protective Services. On occasion, they are trained to do it, but we prefer to do those. We talk for maybe 5 minutes with the parents about the child and what they're like, just a little bit. We don't really people think that we need lots of information. We really don't. We want the interview to be as clean as possible so that there's no interference with what the child may say. Once that happens, the interviewer takes them into an interview room. The interview starts. The other investigators are watching it. In the meantime, our child coordinator or advocate is out with the family, out with the parents, giving resources, telling them what's going to happen next. We do not talk about the case. The child advocate will not go out and say, okay, law enforcement is going to go do this next or this or next. All we do is say you have resources available, get information, mainly listen to them on where they're at. Get correct information on their dates of births and names, things like that. The interview will go, depending on the age of the child, most of them are done in less than an hour. At one point in the interview, the interviewer will leave the child in the room, go back and talk with the investigators and say, is there anything more you need? Then they will say, yeah, we need to know this. We let the interviewer form the question. Sometimes law enforcement will say, just go in there and ask this. And the interviewer will say, well, we'll get that information for you. And so that's why I love forensic interviewers. They're not going to go in and lead or suggest the answers. So they'll go in and get the information. The interview ends at that point. The family comes in and meets with law enforcement and Child Protective Services, and they go over their parts. CPS may put a safety plan in place. Say that you have a brother doing something with a younger sister, there's some abuse going on there, then Child Protective Services would say, okay, they need to be separated. One needs to leave the house, go live with grandma for a while or somebody else, but they can't be in the same house at the same time. So we do the safety plan, part of it. Law enforcement, in the meantime, is now collecting information on how to corroborate what they got from the interview. That information is then taken out to our nurse practitioner. She will review, and that's a very small, just a couple of lines. The child disclosed this, and this. They may say, yes, there may be some penetration that took place during that, or there may be some touching on the outside of the clothes only, things like that. The nurse will then decide if there's going to be a medical examination. In a lot of cases we don't, in a lot we do. So it just depends on what that disclosure was. Following, once that medical exam has been completed, that's usually the next day. We try to let the kids rest in between different events so that we just don't overwhelm them. Once that's done, we put that package together and we present that back to the detective and to Child Protective Services. Then every Thursday for our center, we all meet together. Okay. So everybody in our team, so 40 of us, meet together in one room, and we go over every case from the previous week. And we talk about everything from mental health to what the disclosure was, what the medical looked like, what the county attorney wants to do. If there's suggestions that we could do something else, has somebody already worked with this family? School districts there. School district will look at it and go, okay, we've got this. Because oftentimes we will see a child that's been through that go back to school and then obviously going to struggle sometimes. And all of a sudden you got a teacher going, I don't know what's going on with little Sarah here. Sarah was my top student, and now she's not doing anything. She's disruptive, or she won't. So our school district can step in. Everything's kept confidential, but that school administrator will have the opportunity to say, look, back off a little bit. We're going to do some special things there to make sure she's successful. So there's parts of all of that. And then of course there's resources from the state as far as money, funding, therapy. We have money to send them to therapy. We will offer that and make sure they get there. So in a nutshell, that's it. Then the case moves on. We don't follow up. We don't go to court. We don't do protective orders. We really focus on getting this package of information and so that it's ready to go to the county attorney. and then we're out of it for then. And again, sometimes it's rare, but the county attorney may call us and say, I'd like to get a second interview, and it has to be very well regulated on how we do that second one.
Of course, I have personal feelings about the Children's Justice Center dating back to the days your door opened, but most of our viewers at Profiling Evil know that we're really committed to protecting children and supporting your efforts at the CJC, not only emotionally, Rod, but financially. And we try every once in a while to put our money where our mouth is. We have actually focused the proceeds from my book, Deceived, an investigative memoir of the Zion Society cult, toward child issues, namely the building of a new Children's Justice Center. And the one you have is pretty dang fantastic, but you've got your sights set on a new one, and I want you to talk about that in a moment. But before you do, we just wanted to give you a check and thank you for the efforts that you put forward in blessing these little kids' lives, because there would be nobody else. At least I remember 35 years ago as a cop, there was nobody else. We were interviewing children in smoke-filled, dark hallways in police departments.
Yes, I was there too. I'm trying to forget that. We did our best, but it was what we did at that time.
Well, it's an honor for us to be able to do that, and we've been able to do it for a couple of years now, periodically. But why don't you tell people what this new center is all about? And while you're talking, I'm probably going to put up some pictures of the renderings that you've given me of the new center. And we've been really thrilled to be a part of helping you get the funds you needed to break ground and get going. But talk about what's going to happen next.
Well, first, thank you, Mike. Thank you you seem to come through with money right when I need it. And so the last time we needed money desperately to do soil testing to break ground, and we just didn't have it. And you came up with the funds, and we were able to get the engineers in there, and that started the process. And I just found out the other day that we're probably going to have to pay for our interview system, and we don't. That has to be funded through private donations. That's not going to be government funds there. So I want to keep the same system I have. So thank you, first of all, so much for that, because unfortunately, money is part of this. You have to fund these things, and there's a lot of great organizations out there that are asking for money for the same types of things. So we don't like to be in competition, but we really are passionate about our side of things. So first of all, thank you.
It's our honor, quite frankly, Rod. So thank you for letting us.
We go back a long way. So
we do. We have too many skeletons in each of our closets.
I was going to say,
we have to protect.
Don't make me bring those out for money, but I will. So we've been together a long time. But with what we saw with our old building, first of all, it's too small. And I just want you to think about if you were in a situation like this and you came into our current CJC and there's two other families in the same waiting room. I mean, we have never been able to solve that problem. We just don't have the space, and that's not right. As a family, you should be able to drive in. As you come in, we're going to move you to a separate area of the building. We're going to have a separate waiting room for you. We're not going to mix you with other people. And so that was my biggest concern, is that we just didn't have the space, and that confidentiality was being compromised. That can't happen. When we looked for property this time, we tried to find property that was away from main roads so that you can pull your car in there. Nobody will recognize your car, will see your car. I mean, those things are important because families
don't even think about those kind of things.
No. You don't think about, even though some families obviously don't have any control over what happened, they're still embarrassed by it. And so then it's like we've just added some burden to them, and that's what we're trying to minimize. The other thing with our building is there was a lot of activity going on in one central location right next to the interview rooms. The medical people came in the same. Everything happened in just a short or a small area. That's counterproductive as well. And so when we designed this building, we tried to make it so that the family comes in one entrance, the law enforcement, Child Protective Services comes in a separate entrance. Everybody has their area, and so we will cross over only as we need to. We will take the child down to the medical room, have the medical exam done. If that child needs to come back, we're not going to make them come in the main entrance again and go through that whole process again. We're going to minimize that by bringing them in a separate door, and the nurses can meet and do their follow-up without going through that process. Government, it does actually a pretty good job with this. I know a lot of people are very, anti-government in ways and doesn't think that government is very effective. I would disagree a little bit in this area. There's only 2 states, us and Hawaii, that have government-based programs, and the rest of them are nonprofits across the United States, across the nation. We're the only ones, and I would not be sitting here as the director if I had to run this as a nonprofit. Government has a role, and this is one of them, to protect children and families, and they do a really good job. They back out of things and they just let us do our jobs. And so the center will have a big training room. The training room will be used to train not only law enforcement, Child Protective Services, but local leaders. We plan on bringing in city councils from all the little cities in our county and saying, you have child abuse going on in your counties or in your towns. I met with all of them. I went around and spent a couple of months going to their city council meetings, and they're like, well, we don't really see a need for this Children's Justice Center. Let the county do it. The county's responsibility. And I would say, I can't tell you names, obviously, but we've done 45 cases out of your community, and they were shocked. They're like, we have 45 cases of child sexual abuse in our little city. I'm like, yeah. And they were pretty quick to hand over checks and say, we want to contribute. We want to be a part of this, And so we've designed the building in a way that it's very comfortable. It's very roomy. It's got lots of light. It's going to have some great artwork in it. It's going to be, all those are factors. You got a family, when they walk through the door, they're terrified. They're expecting, the old system, like when we pulled them into an old dark interview room at a police department with guns and badges everywhere and police cars, and they don't see any of that. And when they come in, it's like, this is the worst thing in my life. When they leave, they're thanking us, going, thanks for having a resource that is not so government-like, and it's more like we really care about these kids, and we want them to get on with their lives.
Well, Rod, I would feel really remiss if I didn't mention a couple of people. I mean, I was fortunate to hire or be on the hiring panel of a few of those people, one who later became county commissioner and drove a lot, but most importantly, Reed Richards, who was the county attorney at the time and had this vision of picking up, I think it was number 2 in the country, if I remember right, and being able to serve in those early days in trying to make this happen is one of those things that I'm really proud of. And I just think you have this incredibly bright future, or someone younger in a few years when you say you're done has an incredibly bright future, because this building is going to really be something. I put you on the spot so many times, you don't like me doing this, but when do you think you're going to break ground? Because I know a bunch of now adult women who were the first children through those doors that are dying to come and support you on a groundbreaking.
So we had a great meeting yesterday, or day before. My days are all running together here. And so the construction documents have all been completed. That's a big, giant task. It's taken us months and months and months. And so those should actually be ready to go out by next week. Then we have to give contractors about 3 weeks to look at those. We will meet with those contractors on a couple of occasions and just see what their ideas are. One thing that we're really looking at is to trying to get a contractor that is passionate about the project. We're not building, a grocery store here. We're not building a business building. We're not building, something that's just everyday use. We're talking about a children's justice center. We're talking about what's going to happen within the walls of that center. I want the contractor, whoever gets this, to understand that. When we picked our architect, the first thing I did was take him down to the Farmington County Center, or Davis County Farmington Center, and I walked him through and I said, do you understand what we're trying to do here? And then I gave him some examples of cases. In fact, it was a little interesting. I gave him about 4 or 5 examples of cases we had seen, and he goes, okay, I got it. I don't want to hear any more about cases. He was not, he was starting to get very emotional about it. Like, I don't want to hear any more about cases. And I can see the passion in him now. When somebody says, well, we need to do this system, or we need to put, he goes, look, I don't like that because it's not going to make the kid feel comfortable when they walk in. I want them to feel comfortable. And so now I sit back and he's sitting there fighting the battle. So I want the contractor to be the same. Once we pick that contractor, we really, really are hoping to break ground by 1st of November. So if we miss that deadline, then there's a chance we're going to hit winter, and we want to get our footings foundation in at least before snow. If we do that, then we can work all winter. If we miss that, so right now we're on track to do that. It's just a matter of getting those documents out. And again, we had a great meeting a couple of days ago. So
that is fantastic. Now, I absolutely love the Friends of the Children's Justice Center board, but I'm encouraging every penny that I can influence to go toward dedicated building fund efforts and things to get you up and running. How can people donate directly and make sure that it's earmarked to go into your hands?
They can do it through our website, through that CJC Ogden website. They can go into there, and then it'll say Friends. It'll say Friends of the Weaver Morgan Children's Justice Center, which is our nonprofit side. We do have a little nonprofit component, even though the center itself is government-based. And they can just earmark it. They can just say we're not necessarily looking for them to say, I want this to go to brick and mortar, or this to go to the floors or the carpet or anything else. If they just put to the building construction, we have to use it for that.
Okay, so folks, this is really important. Don't just make a generic donation. Make sure that you indicate in there that it's to go to the building fund. And if you have to put in Profiling Evil or whatever to help earmark that and drive it toward that specific purpose. Because like Rod said earlier, to buy a very intricate camera system, that's one thing that could cost tens and tens of thousands of dollars, but he's got to have things that are specifically needed for that center, not just putting a doorknob on a door. So please make sure you earmark those for the building fund. And if you have to, put via Profiling Evil or something like that. Rod, anything else that I'm missing?
No, I think that's it. I appreciate this a lot. That is how we go forward. And I know these people that donate money, all these folks that they're not recognized. As we started this program, I started a paper with all these people's names, and I started to keep track of, and pretty soon I'm at 200 people. And so I just put the paper away and I said, you may not be recognized for your efforts. We're probably not going to be able to sit there at the open house or at the groundbreaking and say, okay, I'm going to read a list. You're probably not going to get that recognition, but know that if we can hit the services hard at the beginning, if a child can come in, we can catch the trauma early on. If they're 5, 6, 7 years old, or they're a teenager, if we can do it now and we do it correctly. And we're learning every day. We're learning, what did we do wrong? I think we're getting to the point where we're doing a lot of things right. But if we can stop it now, that child's going to go on to be successful. And they're not going to be getting to be 25, 30 years old and then hit a wall, because we've handled it up front and we've got them the resources, we've given them the tools to deal with it when they feel like they're going to hit a wall. But every one of us are going to be affected by these cases. I tried to one day figure out how many people actually were, and I can tell you right now, 25 to 30 close family members are affected by each case. But when you look at the overall picture, you're probably got 200 or 300 people affected by one child sexual abuse case. Because you look at it, the community looks at it and goes, wow, this child down the road was abused by a neighbor. The whole neighborhood now is involved. So you're talking 300 or 400 people in one shot. And so if we can get them the resources and give them a chance at the beginning, you're going to have those come in and be productive, wonderful citizens and go on to have great lives. I've got invitations to weddings, I've got invitations to graduations from victims when they were 5 or 6 years old. And I love that. I get there and here they are getting married and they're happy and they're healthy and they're, and they're going to be just fine. That they really can recover from this. But if we don't hit it right at the beginning, if we mess up the case like we used to do when we were, because we didn't know any better, we were doing our best, then, so that money that helps us accomplish that is beneficial for our communities, not just for that individual, everybody.
Well, Rod, thanks so much for taking time. Folks, make sure you're donating. This one is really important. And again, Rod, I want to just say thanks for taking time, because I know I pulled you away from some meetings to sit down and do this. Thanks again.
You're very welcome. Anytime.
Well, there you go, folks. I hope you'll take a moment and enter your comments down below about what you think about today's discussion. And if there are things that you can do, some of you may even want to weigh in on the fact that you've experienced those kinds of challenges yourself. Now, I hope you'll take time to hit that like and subscribe button and share Profiling Evil with all your friends. You can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and of course, Twitter too. And by the way, folks, if you like audio podcasts, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate your donations, we appreciate your support, and you can get links to all of it down below. But most importantly, think about donating to the Children's Justice Center. And if you do so, I'm going to put a link down below, but make sure you indicate that your funds need to go to the attention of Rod Layton for the building of the new Children's Justice Center. That way it won't get pulled into something else. It'll go where we intended on it going. Hey, thanks so much for your support, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.